FBI Chief Vanessa Carter had just wrapped up a tense meeting that lasted hours. She sat in her car, the weight of national security matters still pressing on her mind. Her mind replayed discussions on terrorism, covert operations, and classified intelligence. The adrenaline from a meeting hadn't quite worn off, but she knew it was time to head home. As she drove through the dark streets, the quiet hum of the road beneath her tires was a welcome relief from the chaos of her day. The city lights blurred in her rear-view mirror, giving her the fleeting feeling of leaving everything behind. Her thoughts wandered to the work awaiting her at the FBI headquarters and the growing list of investigations she had to oversee. But as she neared a more secluded part of town, the flashing red and blue lights of a police car suddenly appeared in her mirror. At first, she wondered if it was a mistake, maybe a radar malfunction. She slowed down, pulled over the side of the road, and stopped. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she was about to find out in the most unexpected and troubling way. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat when Officer Greg Thompson, a tall white cop, approached her car. He walked with slow, deliberate pace, the sound of his boots echoing against the quiet street. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain coldness in his eyes. He came to the driver's side window and immediately demanded license and registration. There was no greeting, no explanation. The way he spoke to her felt dismissive, almost combative. His tone was sharp, and there was no trace of politeness, a stark contrast to what she was used to as a person of authority herself. Vanessa was taken aback. "Is there a reason for stop?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, trying to make sense of the situation. But instead of answering, Officer Thompson only repeated his demand, his hand hovering near his holster, as if preparing for something. His lack of explanation made her uneasy. Something didn't feel right, and she was starting to sense that this wasn't just a routine traffic stop. Vanessa's mind raced through her training, looking for any signs of escalation. Yet, she remained composed, ready for whatever came next. The silence between them stretched for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Vanessa could feel her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from an instinctive alertness. She had been in enough high-stakes situations to know when something felt off. Officer Thompson's gaze shifted from her face to the interior of the car, as if scrutinizing her every move. His posture was tense, and his hand lingered by his sidearm, a clear sign of escalating suspicion. "Out of the car," he suddenly barked, his voice filled with an edge that sent a ripple of unease through Vanessa. She was taken aback, but she didn't show it. She remained seated and looked at him, her expression steady. "I'm not getting out of the car without a valid reason," she replied, trying to maintain control of the situation. She could feel the temperature in the car rising, the situation becoming more heated. His eyes narrowed. "You don't belong in this area," he spat, his words carrying an underlying venom that made Vanessa's blood run cold. The implication was clear. He saw her, a black woman, as an outsider. Her jaw clenched as she realized that this wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something much worse. Vanessa's mind raced, but she kept her composure. She had encountered prejudice before, both as a woman in law enforcement and as a black woman in a male-dominated field. But this was different. This was blatant racial profiling, and she wasn't going to let it slide. She slowly reached for her badge, her fingers brushing against the cool metal before pulling it from her jacket pocket and holding out for Officer Thompson to see. "I'm FBI Chief Vanessa Carter," she said with a calm authority, her voice unwavering. "I suggest you step back and reconsider your actions." Her words hung in the air, firm but measured, like a force ready to dismantle the power Thompson had tried to assert over her. For a brief moment, the officer stood frozen, his eyes darting between her and the badge in her hand. The shift in his demeanor was immediate, but it wasn't enough to mask the arrogance that still flickered in his eyes. "You're mistaken," he muttered under his breath, though his voice was much less forceful now. But Vanessa could see the uncertainty beginning to take root in him. He was no longer in control. Just as the tension in the air seemed ready to snap, a second car pulled up behind Officer Thompson's patrol vehicle. Vanessa's eyes instinctively turned to the new arrival. Another officer, a black man, stepped out from the car with authority. Sergeant Davis. Vanessa recognized him immediately. Sergeant Davis had worked in the same precinct for years, and was known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. He'd earned a reputation for fairness and had a strong moral compass. As he walked toward the scene, his face shifted into an expression of disbelief. He quickly assessed the situation, his gaze landing first on Officer Thompson, then on Vanessa. "What's going on here, Thompson?" he asked, his tone sharp, clearly already aware that something was wrong. The air between them crackled with authority. Thompson stammered, trying to explain himself, but Sergeant Davis wasn't having it. "You're under investigation, Thompson," Davis said coldly. "I'm suspending you immediately." His words felt like a wave crashing down, washing over the tension and neutralizing it in one decisive blow. As Sergeant Davis took over the situation, Officer Thompson's face turned an ashen shade of red. Vanessa could see the guilt settling in him, though it was more a result of getting caught than true remorse. Thompson opened his mouth to argue, but Davis cut him off before he could say a word. "You're done," Davis said sternly. "Your actions today are unacceptable." His eyes flicked to Vanessa, showing a brief moment of solidarity, and then returned to Thompson, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the words. Vanessa's gaze remained steady, but her heart beat a little faster. This was what justice looked like, real consequences for those who thought they were above the law. She'd witnessed the abuse of power countless times, but seeing someone like Sergeant Davis step in to hold Thompson accountable brought a sense of satisfaction that she hadn't expected to feel in this moment. "You can't hide behind your badge forever," Vanessa said firmly, her voice laced with quiet authority. "You'll learn what happens when you misuse your power." The cold night air wrapped around them as Vanessa's words lingered in the atmosphere. Officer Thompson stood silently, his body tense, as if the realization of his downfall was slowly sinking in. He had always believed he could act with impunity, his position of power shielding him from any real consequences. But now, his career was unraveling before his eyes. Sergeant Davis stood beside Vanessa, his arms crossed as he observed the scene. His stern gaze never left Thompson, who seemed to struggle for words. It was clear that the officer had never expected to be caught in such a way, especially not by a woman of color, and certainly not by someone who was higher up in the ranks than he ever could have imagined. The shame was evident in his posture, but it wasn't enough. He hadn't yet fully grasped the weight of the lesson he was about to learn. "This is about accountability," Vanessa said to him, her voice unwavering. "You're in a position of power, but that doesn't mean you're above the law. If you don't understand that, you never will." As the exchange between Officer Thompson and Sergeant Davis continued, Vanessa couldn't help but reflect on the countless other instances of injustice she had witnessed throughout her career. From her time as an agent to now, she had seen the disparities in law enforcement, how the system often worked to protect those who abuse their power. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she saw the system working as it should. Thompson's suspension was just the beginning. The investigation into his conduct would soon follow, and Vanessa knew there would be repercussions. But even more importantly, this moment, this encounter, had the potential to send a message to everyone who had ever used their badge to discriminate, to harm, or to marginalize. That message was clear. No one was untouchable. As Vanessa turned to walk back to her car, she heard Thompson's voice rise in protest. But it was weak now, and his words fell on deaf ears. She had won this battle, and in her mind, the fight for justice wasn't over. It had only just begun. As Vanessa slid into the driver's seat of her car, the reality of what had just transpired began to settle in. The harsh lights of the police cars flickered in her rear-view mirror, and the sound of Sergeant Davis's authoritative voice continued to echo in her mind. She had stood firm, unwavering in the face of blatant injustice, and the result was a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever suffered from such abuse of power. As she turned the key in the ignition, her mind drifted back to the countless encounters she had witnessed during her career. The stories of young black men and women unfairly targeted by law enforcement, the systemic bias that lingered in the shadows of every police precinct, and the voices that had been silenced by fear. Tonight, she had been a voice for justice. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough until the system as a whole changed. But one thing was certain. Tonight, Officer Thompson had learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. He had been held accountable for his actions, and for once, the scales of justice had tipped in favor of those who had been wronged. With a deep breath, Vanessa drove off into the night, her resolve stronger than ever. This was just one step in the fight for justice. The following morning, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a slew of messages from colleagues and friends alike. News of the incident had spread fast, and the media was quick to pick up on the story. The narrative was clear. A high-ranking black female FBI officer had been unjustly targeted by a racist cop, and the incident had been stopped by another officer who took swift action. While some hailed her as a hero, others were more critical, questioning the validity of the entire situation. Was it an overreaction? Was Sergeant Davis right to suspend Officer Thompson immediately? These were the questions that filled Vanessa's inbox. But Vanessa wasn't concerned with the opinions of strangers. She knew the truth of what had happened, and she knew how important it was to continue pressing for systemic change, even when the road ahead was difficult. As she sipped her coffee and scrolled through the emails, she noticed a message from Sergeant Davis. His words were simple but full of sincerity. "You did the right thing. We need more people like you in this fight." Vanessa smiled faintly, feeling a spark of gratitude. The fight was far from over, but it was good to know she wasn't alone in it. By the end of the week, Vanessa found herself standing before a crowd of journalists, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. She had been called to speak about the incident, and while she didn't seek the spotlight, she understood the significance of her position. This was more than just a personal story. It was about a much larger conversation: racial profiling, systemic racism, and police brutality. The press conference was packed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her direction. As she walked up to the podium, a hush fell over the room. She cleared her throat, prepared for the questions that would inevitably come. "How do you feel about the suspension of Officer Thompson?" a reporter asked, her tone sharp. Vanessa paused, carefully choosing her words. "The suspension is just the beginning. We need to continue holding officers accountable for their actions. No one, no matter their position, is above the law. I believe in justice, but I also believe in reform. This is an opportunity for change." The room erupted with questions, but Vanessa remained calm, answering each one with confidence. She knew this was just the start of a much-needed conversation. As Vanessa drove home that evening, the weight of the press conference began to settle in. She had expected some backlash, but nothing prepared her for the level of scrutiny she would face. Social media was abuzz with varying opinions, and the arguments were fierce. Some praised her for speaking out. Others called her actions a threat to law enforcement. The controversy spiraled quickly, her name trending alongside the hashtag Justice for Thompson. It was strange, she thought, to see her own name associated with something so divisive. In a perfect world, her actions would have been seen as a necessary step toward justice. But in a world they lived in, where systemic issues often went unchecked, her stand was seen as a challenge to the status quo. Still, she wasn't deterred. She had seen enough injustice in her life to know that the loudest voices weren't always the most accurate. She knew this fight would take time, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. After all, justice didn't always come easy. In the days that followed, Vanessa's phone was flooded with calls from news outlets, colleagues, and even strangers who had been inspired by her actions. Some wanted her to share her thoughts on how to tackle systemic racism within law enforcement. Others wanted her to speak out about the challenges black officers faced in predominantly white departments. But among all the messages, one stood out: an invitation from Congress to testify before a committee on racial profiling and police reform. The offer was both flattering and intimidating. She had spent years in law enforcement, but this would be different. Testifying before Congress would put her at the center of a national debate on racial injustice. It would be a chance to not only defend her actions, but to advocate for change on a much larger scale. After days of reflection, Vanessa made her decision. She would testify. She couldn't let the opportunity to effect real change slip through her fingers. This was the moment she had been preparing. A network error occurred. Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openai.com. Vanessa stood before the congressional committee, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. The room was packed with lawmakers, cameras, and the ever-present hum of anticipation. This wasn't just another meeting. It was her chance to speak directly to those in power, to shed light on the systemic issues within law enforcement, and to advocate for reform. She had been preparing for weeks, rehearsing her testimony, refining her words so that every syllable carried the force of her experience. As the committee chair called her name, Vanessa stepped forward, her posture straight, her expression unwavering. She knew the significance of what she was about to say. Her words had the potential to spark a movement. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak today," Vanessa began, her voice calm but resonant. "I stand before you not just as an FBI chief, but as a black woman who has lived the reality of racial profiling, who has witnessed firsthand the abuse of power that can so easily go unchecked." The room was silent as she continued, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. She spoke of her own experiences, of the systemic racism she had seen within the ranks of law enforcement, and of the need for accountability and transparency. She called for comprehensive police reform and better training to address implicit bias. Her testimony wasn't just a statement. It was a call to action. Vanessa's testimony before Congress was a turning point. The hearing was broadcasted live, and her words resonated deeply with people across the nation. For the first time, the conversation about police reform was being led by someone with authority and experience, someone who had seen the system from the inside and was willing to challenge its flaws. In the days that followed, the media coverage intensified. Political leaders from both sides of the aisle expressed support for the need to address racial profiling, but they also acknowledged that the road to reform would be long and difficult. While some critics continued to question the methods of police reform, others began to realize the undeniable truth of what Vanessa had said. Back at the FBI, things began to change as well. New policies were introduced to promote diversity and inclusion, and more resources were allocated for implicit bias training. Sergeant Davis, who had supported Vanessa from the beginning, became an advocate for reform within his department. For Vanessa, however, the fight was far from over. She knew the path to true justice would be filled with setbacks, but with every step forward, she felt more confident in the direction they were heading. She had stood up for what was right, and although there was still much work to be done, she could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. As she walked to the FBI headquarters, she caught a glimpse of herself in the glass doors, her reflection strong and resolute. She knew that no matter the obstacles ahead, she was ready to face them one step at a time.